In this video, we're going to try to decide which of the 19,752 different wargaming systems currently available has the best close combat tactical modifying system. No, we're not. We're going to assume that you know absolutely nothing, and we're going to try to explain to you what the hell is going on. Hello everybody. So to explain a bit further, if you just want to understand a little bit about how Wargames rules work, the very basic mechanics, what's going on when you see those people gathered around that table with all those tape measures and bits of paper and dice and moving people around and talking over a rule book that's got 100 pages to it, and they've got quick reference sheets, and they're saying, but what about if you take away this number? What about this? They're crossing a stream though. Forget about all that. You know, what's at the core of all this? How do I start to get an understanding? Because that's quite tough. And I think that as wargamers, nobody likes to be the noob. You know, it's a specialist hobby. You need a lot of specialist knowledge to be good at it, I suppose. You know, you need to learn how to build and paint your army, and then you've got to get into the rules to play an actual game if you want to play an actual game with them. And nobody likes to appear to be the person who doesn't know anything or to be the inexperienced one in many walks of life. So it can be difficult when you get started, because you don't want to be asking what appear to be stupid questions. I'm well over that now. I'm well over it. After 2 or 3 years of confusion and reading through different types of rules and experimenting with different things and playing with people who've played for 50 years and people who've played for 10 minutes, I'm over it. But what I really wish had happened when I very first started was I wish there was a really simple explanation of some of the general trends and general themes that you find in Wargames rules. And if I'd have understood that a little bit sooner and got my head around it and believed it and sort of had that explained to me, then I would have saved a lot of pain. Because if you've spent a lot of time on something like this and you want to make use of it, I mean, I'm definitely somebody who likes to paint and build and collect. That's probably what first attracted me to the hobby, and then the physical building of stuff and like the presentation of a game, and then I want to play with them. I want a game to go on. I want to take part in something against somebody or with somebody in a team and enjoy that side of it. So I want an end product. Let's have this lead to something. There are plenty of people out there who they're just interested in the game. They're not really even interested in the painting or the sticking or the building. They just want to play. So there are some people who've got the mindset that's along the lines of, I'll concentrate on the rules first, get my head around that, learn how to play and enjoy the game, and then I'll worry about this stuff. Then there are people the other way around that build and collect and paint, and then they worry about the rules later. Doesn't matter whether you're one or the other. This is for you, okay? When you're just getting into rules and you just want to understand how this works. First of all, what are Wargames rules? How does this work? Because when we talk about games and games that are played on tables and boards, we often think of board games, don't we? And that's what people often say to me who find out I've got this niche hobby. They raise an eyebrow and then they go, all right, so how do you play with them then? Are there rules? And I go, yes there are. Oh, what kind of rules? And I go, well, there are like several hundred different versions of them. But there are some common themes, and you use dice and use tape measures, and they've got different values, and they go, all right, is it like a board game then? And it's like, well, yes and no. It kind of is. In a way, it is like a giant board game. just with so many different layers, more layers than your average board game, that the similarities start to end sometimes, and the lines get very blurred. Also, just to be clear, there are trends in wargames rules, no doubt about it. They come and go, you know. At the minute, we're in the era of a bit of a divided front between people who like very large, perhaps quite intricate, arguably somewhat slow-moving, more historically accurate rule systems, maybe for huge armies. And there's another maybe sort of type of person that is going for these more what are called skirmish games, where both forces are smaller, maybe 40, 50 a side. Games are a bit quicker, things move a little bit faster, and as a consequence there's maybe a little bit more detail. So there's two common types. And when we talk about getting hold of some rules for war games, they tend to come as single books, basically. Sometimes they come in box sets if they're produced by a certain company, but they tend to come in paper books or PDFs that you can buy from the authors or the publishers. There are loads of them. Let's just go through 3 really quick examples of those three or 4 different types as an example. So here's a rule book. It's called Lion Rampant. It's by Osprey Wargames. It's designed for my sort of period that I like, medieval. And this is a skirmish game. So this is kind of like, if you think of this as in 3 tiers, there's your very basic rules, there's your kind of mid-levels, and then there's your very complicated rules, your bigger battle rules. This is what many people consider to be an example of a really simple, straightforward, arguably a beginner-style skirmish war games rule system. Okay, this book is 64 pages. Okay, so this is what I mean, and I'll be interested to see if we've still got any experienced wargamers listening. I'd love to hear your sort of take on my take of how rules are going at the minute. But at 64 rules, right, that is going to be, if you're a beginner, that is going to be longer than any board game set of rules you've ever played, probably. Okay, and this is beginners. Having said that, these rules are designed in a way that they are reasonably accessible, and they do contain elements of board games or things that you would have seen elsewhere, which perhaps make it slightly easier for the beginner to understand, and that's, I'm sure, very deliberate. So that's your entry level example of entry level, and there are types of entry level rules throughout all the periods, basically. So there's your equivalent of a simple rule set. Okay, you've then got what I would call perhaps and this isn't probably the best example, but you've then got your slightly more nuanced or creative, slightly more complicated set of rules. In this case, this is a game called Saga, which is a popular, again, it's sort of skirmish sized, so you don't need huge armies to play a rule system like this. But this has got sort of elements, different elements, and it's kind of more towards the, I suppose, the fantasy end of gaming a little bit. There are a little bit more layers and detail to this. There's a little bit more, I suppose, characterizations in it. There are more options, I suppose. It's still a skirmish game, I'd say, but there's a bit of more narrative in it and that kind of stuff. So that's perhaps an example of a more mid-level rule system. That's actually shorter than the previous one. It's 50 pages, but it's arguably a slightly more complex, sort of mid-level kind of game. And then I suppose you've got an example of one of the bigger boys. This is a rule set called Hail Caesar. It's published by Warlord Games. It's written by Rick Priestley. This is designed for your classic mass battles. So, you know, hundreds of figures aside. lots of different phases, lots of different troop types. This covers a very long period, you know. This covers from really ancients, going all the way back to ancient Britain, all the way through to sort of mid-medieval period. So it's a very wide period of time these rules cover. And as you can see, there's a lot more consideration to troop movement, troop types, how different weapons in different periods would affect the game, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, this is the thick end of the wedge as far as Wargames rules are concerned. You don't need to be a genius to work out that maybe your very first experience of wargaming should be to go out on your own, buy Hail Caesar and try and learn to play that on your own. You're much better off starting off with something straightforward like this and graduating up to something a bit thicker, if that's your pleasure. That's what I've done anyway. So that's the sort of rough scale of the problem, if you like. But what are we looking at? Okay, what's happening in, you know, what are the common themes throughout most, if not all, of these games? Let's break it down, assuming you know nothing. We've got two opposing units here. We've got two opposing collections of miniature figures. We've got 6 generic knights, just knights in armour here. And we've got 6 archers with bows with less armour. We've got a playing surface, we've got some dice, and we've got a tape measure. Here is how most rule systems are aligned, okay? And there are many, many, many variations. But assume this is one person's force, we'll call them person A. This is the other person's army, person B. All that is happening, whether it's 6-12 dudes or it's 1,000 miniatures on one side and 1,000 miniatures on another, and a massive, you know, 12 foot long by 6 foot wide table, the same thing in some ways is happening. You've got one army over here which has a set of characteristics. You've got this person's army over here which has perhaps a slightly different set of characteristics. So we've got knights who've got lots of armour and heavy weapons in this example. Over here we've got a unit that's got a missile troop. They're missile troops. They've got weaponry that fires missiles, and they've got less armour. Okay. In real life, in inverted commas, if this lot were to have a scrap, they would both behave differently. They're not going to try and duke this out in the same way. So every Wargames rules system is designed to represent in some way, with varying degrees of historical accuracy, in some way that engagement in a way that's fun, playable, and in many cases at least tries to replicate what might happen in history, what might happen in real life, in inverted commas. Because we're moving across a small surface as well, you have to be sort of consistent about distance and movement. Hence, how far troops can shoot or move or run or charge is often dictated by a tape measure. Okay. Again, some people use centimetres in rules, some people use inches. Inches are quite common in Britain. So we've got our sort of set of agreed or assumed characteristics. How do wargame systems represent those different characteristics and somehow deliver an outcome? It's very simple. We use dice, right? Probability, you think, random probability. Well, yeah, kind of. But what we do, what most systems do, is they assign different types of characteristics to different troop types, and then accordingly they are required to get different results on dice. to achieve what outcome they want. I'll explain further in a minute. But for example, when we're deciding how good units are at things, in Wargames rules, you'll look at the troop types and you'll sort of affect how they behave, how good they are at things, by taking away or increasing their probability of achieving something on a dice roll. Okay? As an example, let's say our knights are very good at close combat because they're knights, right? And if they're fighting somebody, in order to score a hit on their opponent, our knights, maybe they only need to score, say, a 3 and above on a dice to score a hit on someone. Okay? Which is, you know, it's obviously greater probability than needing to score 5 or above. They only need a 3 or above. So as an example, if this knight here has just tried to hit somebody, he succeeded because he's rolled a 3. Okay? Let's also assume that because they're heavily armoured, they're quite good at defending themselves and they are reasonably difficult to hurt or to hit. So let's say, for example, to avoid being hurt, they could roll the dice and they only need, again, a 3, 4, 5 or 6 to avoid being hurt. Oh, we rolled a 1. So on this occasion, despite the odds being in our favour, our knight, if he takes a shot, has been wounded. Simple as that. So that's what we'll do. We'll say our knights need a 3, 4, 5 or 6 to hit, and they need a 3, 4, 5 or 6 to prevent themselves being hurt if somebody attacks or shoots at them because of their armour. We'll also say that because they're knights in lots of armour, they can only move 4 inches, which is a relatively short distance, because they're weighed down. Turning to our archers. Number 1, they've got missiles. So we need to determine how far they can shoot their arrows. Let's say they can shoot 12 inches, for starters. And they're going to be a bit faster than knights, aren't they? Because they're not got all that armour. So on good terrain, let's say they move 6 inches instead of 4. Now then, when they fire their missiles, let's assume they're good bowmen. Maybe they need a 3, 4, 5 or 6 to hit their mark when they fire an arrow. If they roll a 2, they would miss. Simple as that. What about when they get in close? As inevitably they're going to, probably in many cases. Not always, but you know, in this time period particularly, you can end up fighting. Let's say they're not as good as our knights, and they only score a hit on their opponent when they're fighting in close combat if they roll a 5 or a 6. Ooh, we got lucky that time. You see what I mean? Our archer scored a hit in close combat. And we'll do this properly in a minute, but I'm just assigning attributes at the minute. Finally, what about if they get hit in close combat or by missiles? These guys haven't got nearly as much armour as these guys. So they're going to need different characteristics, aren't they? They're going to need a different kind of value or property to reflect that if they get hit. So our knights needed a 3, 4, 5 or 6 to avoid being hurt because of their armour. Maybe these guys need a 4, 5 or 6 to avoid being hurt. Oh, a 2. Do you see what I mean? Let's try that out in a very simple system. We've got some agreed characteristics for our troops. Let's give it a whirl. So we'll take it in turns to move, because one way or another, that's how many systems work. And we'll say that it's person A's turn to do something first. They've got no missiles. They could move. Let's move towards our archers, says person A. We can only move 4 inches. That's not going to take us to them, but it's going to get us a little closer. What else can we do? Not very much, because, well, we can't chuck things that far, and we haven't got any bows. That's our turn done. Person B. I could decide to run away or move around them, but because I've got bows, person B decides, am I within range? We said 12 inches, didn't we? I certainly am. I'm in 9 inches there. So person B decides, let's fire our bows. And we'll roll 1 dice per figure, okay? Now I think we needed a 3, 4, 5 or 6, didn't we, to hit our target. So let's roll 1 dice for each of our 6 men. How many hits do we have here? 1, 2, 3. This is a good roll. 4, 5. At that range, our archers have scored 5 hits on our 6 knights. So the arrows have hit. Okay? 5 hits. So our knights, we need to work out whether those hits have hurt them, done them any damage. Have we killed any knights? If you remember, our knights avoid or save damage because of their armour on a 3, 4, 5 or 6. Let's roll then. We'll roll 5 dice because 1 arrow missed. Oh, all of our knights have escaped. The arrows are deflected off, or they've not gone through, or whatever. Everyone's fine. They've rolled well. Unlucky archers. Let's assume that's our turn over, and our knights are going to come a bit closer. In fact, they're going to charge. They're going to use a charge move. So in certain circumstances, most rules allow you to move a different distance, or your distance varies. Let's say our knights can charge when they're within 6 inches of an opponent and use that extra bit of huff and puff to get up there. So person A charges his knights. There we go. We're now at the point where a melee is going to happen. Okay? Some fighting is going to go on. Now then, because our knights did the charging and our bowmen are presumably gathering themselves, knights get to roll first. If I remember rightly, in close combat we decided they were pretty good and they're going to roll a 3, 4. They're going to hit with their weapons on a 3, 4, 5 or 6. So let's roll for our 6 knights. What have we got? Okay. We have 4 hits on our archers. Now, perhaps our archers need to respond to that. We need to work out if they've managed to defend themselves or if their armour's worked out for them. If I remember rightly, they needed a 4, 5 or 6 to avoid being injured. So player B rolls to save his archers. We've got a dead archer. One guy's rolled a 2 and he's lost out. Let's say the next stage is for person B to attempt to fight back at the knights. Remember, we've now only got 5 archers, so we'll just roll 5 dice. They're not as good in close combat as the knights, so again we'll say they need to hit on a 4, 5 or 6. Here we go. 2 hits. So our knights need to defend themselves. I think we said they defend on a 3, 4, 5 or 6, didn't we, because they're armour. They're fine. So on and so forth. This could go back and forth for a while. But you get the point I'm making. Okay? And alright, all of these elements appear with different variations. Some of them don't appear at all, but many of them do, in many, many, many sets of rules. We've got different troop types in Army A, troop types in Army B. We assign different values to how they attack, how they defend, how they move, and we decide how that pans out in activity for reflecting that through the probability of dice. It's as simple as that in many, many cases. So when you see 1,000 figures over here, 1,000 figures over here, there's stuff going over there, there's a tape measure there, there's paper there, there's this, that, there, there's that. At its core, okay, in many cases, you will find these simple principles. Troops with different characteristics. Troops with slightly different characteristics again. Moving against each other in terms of distance, then using those characteristics and those characteristics being reflected in their actions through the values applied to the rolling of dice. Okay? I'm not kidding. That's genuinely what is at the core of 80% of wargaming rules. Genuinely. Of course, there are thousands of variations. So we haven't even spoken about how, if there was a tree in the way, how that would affect the combat. If these guys were coming over a river, what would that do? Maybe these guys are veterans and they've been fighting for 10 years together as mates. Maybe these guys just met each other 2 weeks ago. All of these things can come into it. Maybe actually we decide tape measure is not the best way of reflecting movement, and actually maybe we roll 2 dice to move our knights, equating to 10 inches in this case. Maybe our archers are quicker, we roll 3 dice, so the movement is slightly less predictable, and they move so on and so forth. These are the kinds of variations that start to come in. We've just sort of taken turns there. We've gone A, B, B, A, B, so on and so forth. Lots of systems these days use cards, so they'll attach a card to a unit. When your card comes out of a deck, then it's that unit's turn to move, so on and so forth. These are some of the simple examples of how things start to vary, but at its core, Army A, set of characteristics, Army B, set of characteristics. We move and measure distance in shooting and movement with a tape measure. We decide what happens according to each set of characteristics by the rolling of dice. That's all that's going on. Okay? So don't be scared, and don't be scared to ask questions if you're new. Because although all of these variations and complications are used to create realism or speed or detail in wargames rules, they are all just layers of complexity on top of a very simple set of agreed or assumed principles. That's what's going on. That's why all the dice are being rolled. That's why the tape measures out. All those pieces of paper are all just variations of what I've just described in most cases. Okay? That's how I see it. I could be wrong. If you think you can explain it better than me, there will be people who can explain it better than me. The basics of wargame systems and what is at heart of wargame and how it's played in the modern era. Link below, let me know. But this is for you beginners, alright? Don't be afraid to ask questions. Build up your confidence over time. I know it's complicated. I know it takes a lot of patience, but it's definitely worth it. Because once you get over the initial hump, it's really quite fun and quite simple. Alright, bye for now. I'll see you next time. Like and subscribe if you've not done so already. I'll be very grateful. Stay safe, everybody.